We see a lot of problem in Europe, the immigrant situation. Maybe it's time to Europe to say it was a mistake to take all these immigrants from the Middle East.
Well, I think we have to take things in proportion. The great wave of immigrants from the Middle East were fleeing terrible situations in their home countries of Syria, Iraq, and other places. They were fleeing civil war, death, and destruction. And I think that they should be, and they have been accepted in Europe in accordance with the general principles of extending humanitarian aid and services to people in need, which is what the European Union is all about. But obviously, we have to be better at managing the challenge of immigration. We also need to have better security on our borders so we can ensure what kind of people are coming in to Europe. This is obviously very important. And we also need a better distribution of people, of refugees, those who can be granted asylum and refugee status in Europe. We need a better distribution of those among the European countries so we can ensure that the burden is more equally shared among member states. And I think we have been making progress in this regard. We have been strengthening our border control system, the so-called Frontex. And by the way, we have also been launching a number of naval operations which are rescuing, as you know, as we speak, a lot of refugees in the Mediterranean, mostly coming from Africa rather than from the Middle East. And I think we need to continue to do that. We also need to crack down on those individuals who are making money on being traffickers of refugees and oftentimes charging them exorbitant prices for a very dangerous journey to Europe that in many instances result in boats capsizing and many people dying. But fortunately, a good number of them are being picked up now by rescue vessels that are also funded by the European Union and part of our comprehensive management of the refugee challenge.
And if we're talking about Syria, you know, a lot of people killed every day, thousands, and it seems like that all the focus on Israel. It's absurd.
I don't think it's true that all the focus is on Israel. There's a lot of focus on the civil war in Syria, the fight against Daesh and ISIS, both in Syria and Iraq, the siege of Aleppo, the fighting to free Mosul from the grip of ISIS, and so on. So I think maybe it's more in Israel that you have the feeling that all the attention is on you. If you really look at what's being reported in European newspapers and in international news as such, you will see that I think it's fairly equally balanced and proportional.
Let's move now to Jerusalem. Every time that Israel government want to build in the neighborhood of Jerusalem, you condemn. We don't have a right to build on our capital city?
There's no doubt that the western part of Jerusalem is considered part of Israel. But the eastern part of Jerusalem, which was conquered by Israel in the 67 war, is still considered occupied territory. So therefore, building in Jerusalem can mean, to the extent that it happens in East Jerusalem, that you are building on occupied territory. And to the extent that you are transferring population from your own country to those areas in which you are building, it's a breach of the international conventions concerning occupation of foreign territories. And there are a number of the settlement blocks, as you know, that are bordering Jerusalem, and our view is that these settlement blocks are located on territory occupied by Israel during the '67 war, and therefore Israel is not allowed under international law to build settlements and transfer part of its population to those areas, even though the whole area has been declared as part of Jerusalem as such. That's a unilateral act by Israel, which, as you know, is not recognized by the international community, it's not recognized by the United States of America, and it's not recognized by the European Union, and I'm not aware of anyone who has recognized it aside from Israel. Yeah, I also want to maybe add to your other question that I think that the settlement blocks, one would need to look at how to deal with those in a final settlement of the Palestinian issue. And I think that there is obviously the possibility that the parties could agree on a solution which would mean that the settlement blocks would be incorporated into Israel proper. And we certainly have no problems with that, to the extent that it's something that the parties can agree to. What we have a problem with is unilateral measures which are implemented before there's an agreement with the other party to do that.
Let's move now to the Palestinian school. It seems like that is not a regular school. It's a school that teach to hate Israel. What do you think about it?
I'm not an expert in the Palestinian school system, but I have been given to understand that, of course, there are incidents of incitement, there are incidents of hate speech, and this is behavior which is certainly not appropriate seen from the European Union's point of view. Nevertheless, it's our view that overall the Palestinian educational system is working properly. There are areas in which improvements could take place, as in all educational systems. But we think that the educational system is extremely important, and one should, of course, do whatever we can in order to strengthen it. And we should also be very careful to avoid that the educational system is used to infuse incitement or propaganda and used for political purposes.
We see lately that the say that coming from UNESCO about Jerusalem, you don't think that is absurd?
Well, I mean, the European Union is not a member of UNESCO. We have not voted on this resolution. Some of the European Union member states are members of UNESCO's governing board or UNESCO's council. So I think you must direct your question to them as to what they think of this resolution.
Lately we see a lot of buildings that belong to the Union Europe in Hebron, in places that belong to Israel, like international law. What is that, and why you not condemn that and put it away?
I'm not quite sure which areas you are talking about. Is it in the occupied territories, or
You call that occupied
well,
territory.
yes, exactly. No, the point here is that these areas are certainly not Israeli, at least not at this point in time. They are, in our opinion, occupied territories, and for that reason, Israel, as the power in charge of the occupation, has a responsibility to ensure that the population that happen to live in those areas, which are predominantly Palestinians, as you know, they need to be sufficiently cared for in terms of having shelter, having access to food, to school services, to roads, and so on and so forth. And we would like to see that Israel is providing these services to the people. To the extent that Israel is not doing that, and that has been the case, at least for a certain number of groups, we feel it's incumbent upon the international community to provide those services, that shelter, those solar panels for cooking purposes, and so on and so forth. And that's what we have done. And we find it unacceptable in this regard that Israel has, on a number of occasions, has demolished the structures that we have provided for purely humanitarian purposes. I mean, we do not provide anything which is supposed to be there permanently, but only temporary shelter and temporary assistance, which is given purely from a humanitarian perspective and point of view to make it possible for these people to survive.
You know, every time the Prime Minister of Israel called to Abu Mazen to talk, and it seems like that is no answer in the other side. And don't forget in 2008, the Prime Minister of Israel was Ulmert, that gave him a lot and he not answer. Do you think Israel have a real partner in the other side?
Well, I'm sure Israel has a partner on the Palestinian side. We are encouraging both parties to negotiate and to keep contact. We don't think necessarily it's going to be possible to agree on a final status solution at this point in time. But I think contact is very important in order to take care of some of the day-to-day issues, including ensuring that a two-state solution will continue to be a possibility. As we see now, the two-state solution is being eroded by restrictions on Palestinian activities in Area C, which is over 60% of the occupied territories, through the construction of settlements far beyond the Green Line, deep inside the West Bank. And also by, as I mentioned before, demolition of Palestinian houses, structures, and so on and so forth. And I think that it's more urgent than ever that the parties are in contact about these issues and try to find a solution that would allow the Palestinians to continue to live and live decently in the territories.
Mr. Ambassador, the BDS organization, it seems like that is not stopping. How the Union Europe fight against those organizations like BDS?
No, but I think it's very clear that the European Union is on record being against BDS or any other form of boycott or isolation of Israel. At the same time, obviously, we have freedom of speech in Europe, and as long as it takes place with non-violent and legal means, we cannot prevent anyone in Europe from advocating from BDS or for BDS, just as you cannot stop anyone or prevent anyone here in Israel from advocating against boycotting other countries in the world.
But we don't do that to the Europe. The Europe do that to Israel.
We don't. I don't know when you're talking about Europe. There are individuals in Europe who are supporters of the BDS. What I'm being asked about is what the European Union's position on BDS is, and I've explained we are 100% against it. On the other hand, there's freedom of speech in Europe, and you cannot prevent people from expressing their support for a certain point of view to the extent that it's not violent and against the laws of the land. And so, I mean, we have no way of stopping that and no wish to do it either, because that would be a gross limitation on freedom of speech, freedom of association. But that doesn't mean that we agree with the message. There are many things here in this country that you don't agree with either, but you still allow the activity to take place. I mean, your government is in great disagreement with a large number of NGOs here in this country. Still, they are allowed to operate, and even though the government and maybe even parts of the public also are against what they're saying. So it's now different in Europe. So I don't think that Israel should expect that we in Europe would do things that you wouldn't dream of doing yourself in this country.
Thank you very much for this interview, Ambassador.
Yes, no, it's a pleasure. Thank you very much for having me.